Well, sugoi! This Next.js tool looks great, and thanks for all the information on server-side rendering. I think you're right. I don't think we need RoboFriends app to be server-side rendered for now, but maybe on future projects we can use something like Next.js. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. God, you're awesome. All right, we've done it again. Another task done for Bruno and Keiko Corp. Hopefully, you now feel comfortable with the idea of server-side rendering and client-side rendering, and you're able to make a smart decision on when to use what. If we remember, server-side rendering is great for static sites. Initial page loads are faster, and SEO is definitely better with them. The drawback being that it still does full page reloads. The rendering can be slower because of that, and we have multiple requests to the server, as well as increasing the complexity of our app. Client-side rendering, on the other hand, was really good for rich interactions, fast website rendering after the initial load, and it was a good tool for web applications. But it did have the drawback that SEO was really hard to get right, and you had that longer initial load. Now, to finish off, I want to show you 3 charts that I think are really helpful. The first chart we're going to look at is how a regularly JS rendered page looks. We have the initial request, the HTML arrives, and starting from there, we start requesting all our resources, including our large JavaScript file. The JavaScript file arrives, it then gets parsed and evaluated, and our view is finally painted, and we have interactivity. You see, it takes a long time to actually have a workable page. And we've already discussed this to bits. The second graph is with server-side rendering. We have our initial request, HTML arrives, but because we have information on our HTML page, we get a faster view painted. The problem being that we might have the view painted onto the screen, but we have to wait for the JavaScript to arrive, be parsed and evaluated. So we have this thing called uncanny valley, where the web page looks like it's ready, and you might start clicking on a button, but it won't start working until all this JavaScript business is taken care of. So maybe perhaps there's a better solution. Perhaps we can use something called progressive rendering. The idea behind progressive rendering, and you know what? We've actually been talking about it throughout the course. We only send out only what you need for the initial render. Then you progressively make more features and pages available in the background as more things arrive. So you might remember code splitting. That's what it is. Code splitting was sending only what we need to the front end. Above the fold loading, that was sending only what we need to the front end. And then once the web page is loaded for the user, then we start loading any background scripts, maybe a new page, maybe the menu bar only when the user clicks on it. The idea is that we make the initial request, HTML arrives, and we don't have that uncanny valley. Things start working really fast, and we just slowly, progressively make our app start working in the background without the user noticing. And you can actually see this in the React docs once again. If we go to the React page and I open up the tab, if I go to network and I refresh, I see that I'm downloading a ton of things. We see that there's this load line, which is the red line. So the web page has been loaded. But then after that, we have all these things that seem to load in the background. They're trying to get this progressive loading happening. Very cool. And many companies use this kind of way of making their websites fast. Big companies such as Flipkart or AliExpress. And then there's the idea of serving a shell or a skeleton of an app. Companies like Flipkart and AliExpress use this, where they server render a shell or a skeleton screen that gets printed right away so that it feels like content is loading immediately, even though in the background there's actually loading happening on the client side. Now, this is a combination and strategizing about what you ship to the front end, what you render on the server. And that's important to think about. Again, as a senior developer, there's always trade-off. It's never black and white, right or wrong. For each situation, you're trying to figure out what is the best thing that you can do. And you can take pieces from client-side rendering and server-side rendering to make it work for whatever your needs are. For example, there's a tool called prerender.io, and it allows JavaScript websites to be crawled for search engines. And they do that by actually having a service where they render the page for you, and you're able to save that rendered HTML to the crawlers. And there's many, many things that you can do. The idea being that you want to know how things work and then decide for yourself what avenue you want to take and what pieces you want to take from each. So, to finish off, we talked about server-side rendering, client-side rendering. We took a look at great libraries like Next.js that make server-side rendering dynamic apps easy. And we also learned that companies like Priceline, Walmart, Airbnb are a big fan of things like server-side rendering because they care about their SEO. A lot of their customers come through SEO, and they want to make sure that that is as fast as possible. But other websites might not be as interested in that and adding that extra layer of complexity. So they try and do something that is client-side rendered, but also progressive enough where they minimize the amount of JavaScript we send to the front end. I think Bruno's happy with our decision that the RoboFriends app doesn't need to be server-side. It's fairly fast already, our JavaScript files are fairly small, and we don't care too much about SEO with our RoboFriends. So I think we're good sticking with client-side rendering. What do you think? I'll see you in the next section. Bye-bye.